from the unexpected flare-ups of engines to dizzying landings on the very edge of possibility. Today, we will tell you about astonishing aviation incidents and unbelievable rescues that take your breath away. You can expect adrenaline levels off the charts and stories so gripping that you absolutely must watch until the very end. On a sunny day over a beach in Hampton, a scene suddenly unfolded that made everyone on vacation hold their breath. A small airplane towing an advertising banner unexpectedly found itself in a critical situation and decided to land right on the water. As soon as the landing gear touched the surface, the tail shot upwards in a sharp motion, but then the plane settled back on its belly without flipping over. Inside the cockpit was only the pilot. And, to everyone's relief, he sustained no injuries. Local lifeguards on duty at the beach immediately moved toward the aircraft and quickly pulled the pilot from the water. According to eyewitnesses, the aircraft stopped responding to controls due to engine malfunctions, and the pilot chose a relatively safe emergency landing on the water. Registration data pointed to a light Piper belonging to a small aerial advertising company. The flight itself was short. The airplane took off from a local airfield, managed to complete only a few circles over the coastline, and just moments later had to make a water landing. After the aircraft was towed ashore, representatives from the Federal Aviation Administration began investigating the causes of the accident. Fortunately, no one was hurt, and everyone escaped with only a severe fright. A reminder of how quickly the sky can deliver the most unexpected twists. Now, let us move on to another impressive episode, which turned out to be literally a hair's breadth from disaster. On the island of Skiathos, in Greece, a hot and clear day turned into a chilling moment for those who love to film airplanes taking off and landing. A huge Wizz Air aircraft approached the runway at a much lower altitude than usual, and aviation enthusiasts standing near the runway felt the true blast of wind from the incoming airliner. The airport in Skiathos is famous for its short runway, only slightly over 5,000 feet, and pilots have to descend earlier and more sharply than in typical airports, where the runway can stretch to 10 or even 12,000 feet. Additionally, the sweltering weather with thin air significantly complicates controlling the aircraft upon landing. Eyewitnesses say that one photographer barely had time to duck as the airliner passed literally a few feet above his head. The flight from Naples took about 1 hour. The aircraft circled above the island, approached for landing, and ended up making a rather low arc before touching the runway. Pilots admit that on such a resort strip with a shortened runway, they must demonstrate extreme precision and composure. But the stories of miraculous rescues are not limited to airplanes. Sometimes they involve entirely different types of machinery. Rescue operations often turn into an extreme test not only for the victim, but also for the rescuers themselves. In Arizona, an elderly woman who had injured herself on a mountain trail never expected that her helicopter lift would dazzle everyone with its spectacle. When the helicopter picked her up from Piestewa Peak, it seemed like everything would follow the standard procedure. The cable would pull the stretcher to the helicopter, and soon she would be lifted inside. But as soon as the helicopter began to gain altitude, the stretcher started spinning due to air currents and a malfunction with a safety line. The injured woman found herself in a mesmerizingly horrific rotation that lasted dozens of seconds. Rescuers tried multiple times to lower and lift the stretcher to stabilize it, but the helicopter's rotor wash only fueled the spin. Finally, once the pilot gained some forward speed, the carousel stopped and they managed to pull the woman into the cabin. Despite the monstrous G-forces, she escaped with only severe dizziness and nausea. In other cases, machines literally split apart, yet people somehow managed to avoid tragedy. A surprising incident took place at Juan Santamaria Airport in Costa Rica. when a DHL cargo Boeing 757 requested an emergency return to the airfield. The aircraft, initially headed for Guatemala, encountered a serious hydraulic system failure just moments after takeoff. During the attempted emergency landing, the aircraft swerved sharply off the runway and skidded until it ended up off its bounds, where the fuselage split into two pieces, separating the tail section. The yellow DHL fuselage was doused with special foam to prevent a potential fire. It all happened as if in slow motion. The pilots were still in the cockpit, but fortunately, they sustained no serious injuries. The crew managed to escape on their own. Nonetheless, some air disasters happen not due to faulty equipment, but because of fatal mid-air collisions. Over the naval base of Lumut in Malaysia, a parade rehearsal ended with a terrible outcome. Two military helicopters unpredictably crossed paths in the sky, and one clipped the other with its rotor blades, instantly triggering a chain of fatal consequences. Both helicopters plummeted to the ground. One landed on a stadium running track, the other fell into a nearby pool. According to official Navy reports, all 10 crew members on board were killed on the spot. The helicopter models were the Com and the Fench, both participating in a training flight for an upcoming celebration marking the anniversary of the naval forces. The Prime Minister of the country expressed deep condolences to the families of the deceased and called the incident a true tragedy. This case once again reminds us that even routine maneuver drills can become extremely risky if even the slightest mistake is made. But danger may not only arise from collisions. Sometimes, a sudden loss of cabin pressure creates highly alarming moments for passengers. One of Alaska Airlines' flights on a Boeing 737 MAX was departing from Portland to California when a quiet and routine beginning to the flight turned into a loud bang. The door in the middle of the fuselage suddenly blew off outward, still at a low altitude, and passengers managed to capture a snippet of this horror on camera. There were about 171 passengers and 6 crew members on board. The pilots promptly turned the aircraft around and returned to Portland International Airport, fearing that the damage might be more serious than it appeared. According to tracking data, the aircraft had climbed to about 16,000 feet before it was landed. This particular Boeing 737 MAX was delivered to the airline only in October 2023, had carried out about 145 flights, and was considered fairly new. However, the rear exit door, which is typically locked during flight, suddenly ended up open. Fortunately, none of the passengers or crew was hurt. Sometimes air crashes are linked to birds, since they follow entirely different rules of flight. Another shocking moment occurred when a United Airlines aircraft was taking off from O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Barely had the plane left the runway when several birds were ingested into the left engine. Those on board and on the ground watched in horror as flames burst from the engine. The pilots immediately reported an emergency to the controllers and decided to return. People on the ground heard a deafening roar from the engine and saw distinct bursts of flames. One eyewitness, Allison Dawn, admitted that the noise was so overwhelming that it felt like the aircraft was already losing control. Thankfully, the airplane landed safely on the same runway after a short amount of time. None of the passengers was harmed, and after landing, they were transferred to a backup aircraft that departed for the destination several hours later. Now, let us look at a situation where stormy conditions could have led to a real disaster, but fate seemed to protect the passengers. When the first rays of dawn lit the famous Cappadocia cliffs in Turkey, no one expected that the picturesque display of hot air balloons would turn into a frightening episode. One of the baskets, carrying about 24 tourists and 2 pilots, suddenly collided with a rock formation. According to eyewitnesses, it happened because of a sudden gust of wind that literally pushed the balloon toward the rocky ridge. Videos show how the basket slides along the steep slope. Many tourists experienced real shock, and one passenger even lost consciousness. Despite the alarming crash, no one sustained serious injuries. Only a few passengers required medical checkups. Local authorities noted that the pilot, who had extensive experience, managed to orient himself correctly and quickly took the necessary steps. But not every case ends in mere fright. When a paraglider loses control, every second can count. An experienced paraglider pilot named Kevin Phillip became the hero of a truly miraculous rescue during a training flight in Spain, while attempting a complex aerobatic maneuver. Severe turbulence distorted the canopy's shape, and the lines tangled hopelessly, leaving the paraglider in an uncontrollable fall. The first reserve system did not deploy as it should have. The parachute also twisted into a bundle around the pilot. As the ground rapidly approached, the athlete managed at the very last moment to free a secondary system himself. Just a fraction of a second before the expected impact, the orange parachute filled with air and softened the landing. Phillip admitted that several factors of bad luck converged in this event, and such cases are extremely rare. Yet that does not change the fact that any mistake at such an altitude can end in disaster. Indeed, he was incredibly fortunate to get out of this ordeal alive and without serious injuries. Now we turn to a moment when a flare-up of fire on board threatened far more dire consequences, if not for the swift and coordinated actions of the crew. An Air Canada Boeing 777 carrying 400 passengers departed Toronto Pearson Airport en route to Paris, when, in a single moment, everyone watching from the ground had their hearts sink into their stomachs. Sparks flew from one of the engines and flames burst forth. The flight lasted barely over 1 hour. The commander of the aircraft immediately decided to return, and after a short interval, the plane landed safely back. On the runway, it was met by fire crews and rescue services. Fortunately, only the engine was damaged, and the aircraft itself was quickly taken for inspection. The passengers, alarmed by such an attraction, were transferred to another flight that departed later that same night. This incident became yet another in a series of worrying signals related to Boeings. Previously, issues had been reported with engines on other planes, and each such case raises many questions about the safety of certain models or specific components. However, thanks to the pilot's professionalism, this ended without tragic consequences. Yet sometimes it is in the skies that we witness miracles of engineering, which may soon overturn our idea of travel entirely. SpaceX has made an incredible leap forward. In a test launch of what is currently the largest spacecraft, Starship, with the gigantic Super Heavy booster, engineers used a special system of mechanical catches for the very first time. This construction has been nicknamed Mechazilla. The rocket was launched from the spaceport in Texas. All 33 engines performed during liftoff, after which the booster separated and attempted to return to the launch site. For the first time in history, such a massive rocket stage not only made a landing, but was caught by giant metal arms, which clamped onto it with almost no harm to the structure. The Starship upper stage continued its journey, achieving orbit and going through extremely challenging tests upon re-entry. The temperature it encountered exceeded 3,000 degrees. Even so, the upgraded heat shield tiles and aerodynamic components passed the test. SpaceX is confidently moving toward fully reusable flights, saving billions and paving the way for more frequent launches to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. It might seem that space is full of complexities, and everything in earthly flights is already perfected. But the next story proves that danger can strike even where we least expect it. In spectacular footage from eyewitnesses, a passenger airliner belonging to one of the popular airlines narrowly avoids encountering a powerful tornado in the sky over Fort Lauderdale. The video clearly shows massive funnels forming nearby as the plane follows its own course, nearing the edge of the storm front. From the look of the footage, the airliner passes extremely close to one of the twisters, making passengers and people in the airport clutch at their hearts. Fortunately, the pilots managed to circumvent the critical zone without losing altitude or control. Airline officials later confirmed that the situation seemed frightening only from the outside, but the pilots had everything under control. Sometimes, even ground obstacles become the reason for incredible stories, when an aircraft ends up where it definitely does not belong. North of Toronto, a Cirrus SR-20 training aircraft took off from Buttonville Airfield to carry out a routine touch-and-go exercise. But that day, the lesson went completely off track. The plane failed catastrophically to gain altitude and, after bursting through a fence, flew straight onto a busy road. Dashcam footage shows the wing nearly clipping a car moving in the oncoming lane. Just fractions of a second, and tragedy could have occurred. Incredibly, the plane managed to slip through and crash into a ditch on the opposite side. The police and rescuers who arrived were shocked to see that both the instructor and the student survived and were not seriously injured. Officials from Canada's Transportation Safety Board confirmed that the plane was performing a standard training sequence, touching the runway, a short roll, and taking off again. However, either the wind or an overload caused the aircraft to start losing lift. Even the most familiar procedures, like landing, can be full of surprises when technology or the weather decides otherwise. Frontier Airlines experienced one of its most intense flights when a plane traveling from San Diego to Las Vegas almost caught fire right on the runway at Harry Reid Airport. The crew smelled smoke in the cockpit and immediately reported an emergency. During the landing, there was a hard impact on the runway. The tires gave out, burst, and tongues of flame leaped around the landing gear area. Witnesses inside the terminal saw thick smoke billowing from beneath the fuselage. Fire services arrived instantly, and all 190 passengers plus 7 crew members evacuated without a single scratch. Sometimes, the cockpit of an airplane suddenly ceases to be safe when the protective canopy disappears right in the middle of an aerobatic maneuver. Imagine this. You are about to perform a complex aerobatic roll in your Extra 330 LX sports plane, and during the barrel roll, the front transparent part of the canopy breaks off and shatters into pieces. That is exactly the terrifying situation that befell a pilot and musician named Nareen Mooman. A fierce rush of air burst into the cockpit, depriving the pilot of normal visibility and nearly overwhelming her with the roar of turbulent airflow. Mooman said it took her an entire day to recover from the shock and restore her vision. Yet, despite the ordeal, she did not lose her composure and managed to level the craft for a safe landing. The cause was something simple. The pre-flight check had been done inattentively, and the pilot had not fully secured the special locking pin for the canopy. As a result, the high stress and low external temperature compounded the trouble. Sometimes helicopters, trying to land gently, turn into battering rams, breaking everything around them. An unexpected event in Texas. A small Robinson R-44 helicopter attempted to land near a hangar, but something went wrong. The aircraft suddenly tilted and crashed into a little plane parked nearby. Surveillance camera footage shows how the rotor, still spinning, literally rips apart the fuselage of the light aircraft. Everyone heard a terrible crunch and saw debris flying everywhere. Yet, in an unbelievable stroke of luck, the helicopter pilot got out on his own and was not seriously injured. Representatives of the Federal Aviation Administration arrived on site to investigate why the pilot was unable to keep the helicopter on course. However, the fact remains. In this situation, it was astonishing that no one was killed. Finally, let us recall those moments when airplanes find themselves in critical condition soon after takeoff and must return to the airfield before continuing on their way. A tragic incident occurred in Afghanistan when a Boeing 747 carrying heavy military equipment crashed shortly after departing from Bagram base. 7 crew members died, and a video from a car dashcam became a grim testament to the event. The footage shows how the mighty cargo airliner first gains altitude, but suddenly loses lift, begins to roll, and almost freezes in the sky before plummeting from a great height, exploding on impact, and blanketing the area in thick smoke. It is believed that the primary cause was improper loading of heavy armored vehicles, which shifted the airplane's center of gravity. Officials from the airline that owned the Boeing and relevant authorities denied rumors that the plane could have been shot down. The investigation took a long time, collecting black boxes and analyzing cargo distribution charts. But the fact that it fell so abruptly shows how crucial precise calculations are in cargo air transport. Now let us move to a project that recently seemed like science fiction, but is already completing successful flights, inspiring confidence that the future is much closer than we think. In Slovakia, a company called Klein Vision conducted a test flight lasting just over half an hour between 2 cities. But it was no ordinary airplane. It was a real flying car, capable of transforming from a road vehicle into an aircraft in just about 3 minutes. The prototype was equipped with a BMW engine producing around 160 horsepower, with a propeller mounted at the rear. In the video, you can see how the craft takes off smoothly and reaches speeds of over 118 miles an hour, maintaining an altitude of up to 8,200 feet. Upon landing in the other city, it transformed back into a car and was driven into the city center without any issues. The next generation promises 300 horsepower, speeds exceeding 186 miles an hour, and a range of more than 620 miles. Plans are to create 3- and 4-seat versions, as well as twin-engine and even amphibious variants. It appears we are witnessing the dawn of a new era in transportation, where car and airplane become one. And finally, a story about how an innocent seaside activity turned into a true test of resilience for a married couple. On the seaside in Goa, India, a married couple decided to go parasailing. The romance of soaring above the water ended abruptly when the rope holding their parachute suddenly snapped at the peak of their ascent. They spent a few more moments at maximum height before they began plunging swiftly toward the ocean. Their relative, who was filming from the boat, screamed in horror, watching them vanish into the waves. Fortunately, it all ended well. They were wearing life jackets, and sailors were nearby to quickly assist them. Later, the couple admitted that the cable looked worn, and they had mentioned this to the ride operators, who assured them everything was under control. Unsurprisingly, after the incident, any desire to file an official complaint somewhat subsided. The main thing was that the participants themselves came out safe and sound. And to wrap up our journey, we share a story of a landing that ended catastrophically. Yet some passengers survived, although the outcome could have been very different. In early May 2019, images of a burning Sukhoi Superjet 100 belonging to the Russian airline Aeroflot were broadcast around the world. The airliner, on which there were more than 70 passengers and several crew members, returned to Moscow's Sheremetyevo Airport shortly after takeoff due to an emergency. Passengers later recounted hearing a loud thunderclap of lightning, after which the pilots requested an emergency landing. The problem was worsened by the fact that there was still a large amount of fuel in the tanks. The plane came in heavily for landing and, as a result of a harsh touchdown, ignited instantly. The burning aircraft rolled along the runway, and only some of the people managed to escape via the emergency slides. The tragic outcome, many fatalities including children, but about 1/3 of the passengers survived thanks to the swift reaction of the flight attendants. This incident reignited discussions among experts about the safety of lightning strikes for modern aircraft fleets. and about how crucial the human factor is in critical situations. And so an entirely routine flight can suddenly turn into an incredible story, filled with sudden twists and intense emotions. From breathtaking rescues to cutting-edge technology that opens up new horizons, each event confirms that the sky does not forgive mistakes. Yet it still offers us hope for miraculous survival and the triumph of human ingenuity. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. You have been watching the Top Facts channel, a laboratory of astonishing compilations of facts and videos from all over the internet. Thank you so much for watching, and go watch our previous incredible episodes right now.